we have Rob coming, who is the executive director of May We Help. And this is where they take with people with disabilities who want to become independent, and they help them with equipment and various things they need.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thanks. I'm super excited to be here tonight. Thank you very much for having me. We are right down the road, just 4 minutes away, right behind the tire discounters on Worcester Pike. Okay. The reason we're there, this is kind of a fun little story, is there are 3 founders of May We Help. They happen to all be named Bill. There's Bill Sand and Bill Diamond, who are still with us and very active in the organization. And there's a third founder, Bill Wood, who sadly passed away in 2010. But Bill Wood is Chip Wood's dad, and Chip Wood, of course, is the founder of Tire Discounters. And we are located in the original corporate headquarters of Tire Discounters. It's kind of fun. It's a big, beautiful space that he looks out for his dad's legacy that way. But before we talk about May We Help, I just wanted to set a little bit of context for you. And I wanted to share a conversation that I had with one of our volunteers a few months ago at the Frisch's just down the road. And it went like this. His name is Gary, and Gary and I were sitting at lunch, and his son was with us, because his son goes everywhere that Gary goes, because he has very complex needs. He's in a power chair, he's nonverbal, and that's just the beginning of his needs. He can't feed himself, and so he was, anytime I have lunch with Gary, it's always the same way. Gary feeds his son, so his son eats and I eat, and Gary feeds his son and doesn't eat. And Gary just puts his lunch in a to-go box and takes it home, and I don't know when Gary eats. But anyway, we're having the most interesting conversation, and he was telling me about when he and his wife first got married, first got together, and they were talking about, they were here in Cincinnati, but they were talking about where they wanted to start their adventure together. They could go anywhere in the world, but they were just looking at the U.S. And so they did a ton of research. They had the map out, and they were picking, just researching their cities that they thought they might want to begin their lives together in. And they were putting little, pins in each city that they liked and so forth. And it was a month-long process, but they loved it. And they decided in the end that they were going to move to Boulder, and that's where they were going to start their lives together. And then they gave birth to their son. And they quickly realized they weren't going to Boulder at all. They had to rethink where they were going to live, because they needed a city that had the resources that were needed to keep their son, at least give him the best quality of life that he could have. So they restarted all their research, just with a different perspective. And they got the pins back out and the map back out, and they started putting pins in the cities that would best be able to accommodate their son's needs. Interesting, in the end, they decided that Cincinnati had the most resources to help their child of any city in America. So the conversation kind of begs the question, why is that? I mean, we're not this giant metropolis, you know what I mean? Why do we have the best resources for Gary's family's son than anywhere else, like New York City or LA or something like that? And we don't know the exact answer, but we think, and the way the conversation went is, we netted out that Cincinnati, all these resources like May We Help, who his kid relies on a lot, but all these resources that Cincinnati has, what do they rely on? They rely on generosity of spirit, volunteerism, any sort of support, right? And Cincinnati has a culture that supports the resources that are needed for kids like Gary's. And it's the culture that we've created here that made his family want to stay here. And that has far less to do with May We Help and far less to do with me, and way more to do with all of you, and the culture that you've created in Cincinnati. And so I want to take a minute before I even start talking about May We Help. Give yourselves a hand. You've created a culture where Gary's family wants to stay. So thank you. This is pretty neat. Anyway, one of those resources that Cincinnati supports is May We Help. And just like Barb said, what we do is we create devices, or we make modifications to devices for people with disabilities in order for them to usually do one of two things. either become more independent or pursue a passion. But without a particular device or a modification of device, they can't do it because that device is not commercially available. Typically because the people whose needs we deal with, they're rare and they're complex and they're difficult. And in addition, insurance isn't always there for them. This is a fascinating little fact that I learned when I joined May We Help. Insurance only covers a new wheelchair once every 5 years. You can't buy your kid a pair of shoes and expect them to last more than 5 months. So how on earth is a wheelchair supposed to last a child's for 5 years? They grow, their needs evolve, their conditions change. And that's when we come in. So they can come to us and say, you know what? I'm not comfortable in this wheelchair anymore. Can you fix it for me? So that brings to the question, so who's doing all this work? May We Help only has 3 staff. Of those 3 staff, there's only 1 full-timer, and that's myself. And then we have 2 part-timers. The rest of the people are all volunteers. And most of them are retired engineers. And that's where we get the expertise to make all the modifications to devices and equipment that we do. So let's take a look at some of them. We can go to the next slide, please. There's a perfect example of the type of person that we might help. She needs a joystick to control a power chair. Her situation is that she doesn't have any hands or fingers to control a joystick with. So what does she do to become independent, to have independence? So what our engineers do is they'll take, in her case, they built a chair just for her. The joystick is located up here where her shoulder is because she's got plenty of dexterity and strength in her shoulder to manage it. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see how our engineers lay it out. And they built her a wheelchair from scratch that allows her to be independent and zip around anywhere she wants to go. So that's an example of how we might help somebody achieve independence. So if we go to the next slide, this is an example of how we might help somebody pursue a passion. So this young girl, she came to us and said, I need a device that will help me hold a cello bow in between my toes with more precision. Because she's not playing row, row, row your boat. She's actually the number 11 ranked junior cellist in Pennsylvania. She plays in an ensemble. She needs the precision in her bow to keep up with the rest of her peers. And so that's what we created for her. If we go to the next slide, you'll see her. And not only did we have to create something that would allow her to hold a cello bow with her feet, we had to create a base for the cello that would get it off the ground and at the height that she needed it, but also, just as importantly, the cello had to be placed in such a way that it would give off the sound that she wanted it to have. And so it became a sort of an engineering feat. But she's an amazing individual. And I got to tell you, this is kind of a funny story too. I was at a different nonprofit 4 years ago. It was my first day in the nonprofit world. I came from the for-profit world, doing corporate strategy to make corporations grow bigger, which is the last thing we needed. But anyway, I went from the for-profit world into the nonprofit world, and on my first day in the nonprofit world 4 years ago, somebody told me about May We Help, and I was so taken with the mission that I got in the car on my first day at this other job and drove to May We Help. I knocked on the door, and they said, "Who are you and what on earth are you doing here?" And I explained that I was really taken with what they did, and they said, "Well, would you like a tour?" And I said, "I'd love a tour." On that particular day, they were working on the device for this young woman, Inga, and they played me some of her music, and I was hooked on May We Help for life right after that. I mean, I started following May We Help, and was just really excited about the work that they were doing. But this is the crazy thing. 4 years later, now I'm the executive director at May We Help, and on my first day at the job, the phone rings. So it's the first call, I pick it up. "Hi, this is Rob." It's Inga. I'm like, "Oh my goodness." She goes, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, Inga, you don't know me, but I know you, and I have shared your story with hundreds, if not thousands of people, and quite honestly, you're the inspiration for me to be at May We Help. So I think I was meant to be at May We Help." Anyway, I said, "What can we do for you today?" And she said, "Well, now I've entered university, And not in her backyard either. She was living in Pennsylvania, but she's in New York City in college. God help them. I mean, I don't know how worried they must be every day. But anyway, he said, what can we do for her? And she said, well, I don't like asking my roommates to help me get dressed in the morning. Can you guys create for me a dressing hook? Because what she needs, like in our bathrooms, all the hooks are right about here, right? Which works out great for our needs. But those don't work out for her needs at all. She needs a hook that she can put anywhere on the wall at any height in order to help her get ready in the morning. So we created a dressing hook that uses a suction cup to stick to anywhere in her bathroom. And what she does, what she does is she'll hook her belt loop maybe to it, and then she can step in to her pants. It's amazing. And she's 100% independent with this dressing hook. She actually toured Europe with it. So we allowed her to really, be 100% independent and tour the world. I mean, that was just so cool. So anyway, that's my English story. We can go to the next slide. Some of these slides I don't even have to speak to, they just sort of speak for themselves. But you can tell this young man does not have the strength to hold his arm up, but he's an artist, he loves to draw and paint. So we created what we call the sky arm. We just delivered one of these to St. Joseph Home. Anybody familiar with St. Joseph Home? St. Joseph Home is out in the Blue Ash area. They have 48 residents at St. Joseph Home with the most complex needs imaginable. 46 of those 48 residents are nonverbal, and like I said, just really complex needs. But anyway, we just delivered one of the sky arms to them, so now they're using it there. We deliver these all over the place because they work great. Oh, this is a very recent story. So this young boy on the far left, he loves the beach. His whole family loves the beach. He has to be supine. He can't hold his head up at all. So he can't even be in a wheelchair. He always has to be lying down, and he has so many different pieces of equipment that literally are keeping him alive. And the family sent us that picture on the left and said, this is the best solution we've got. They have 2 snow sleds. They dragged him in one, and they dragged all his equipment in the other sled. They said, can you help us? So our volunteers created this beach wagon that holds the young boy and all his equipment. And it's super lightweight, and it assembles and disassembles with just a few easy steps so they can put it right back in their car, and you can see from the middle picture that it's working great. So not only do we give the one client a more independent life, but we help their caregivers. Even in St. Joseph Home, for example, if we go back to that for a minute, if we can help this person over here become a little bit more independent, that means that person's caregiver can pay a little more attention to that person over there. Or maybe just take 5 or 10 minutes for themselves. Maybe that person's a mom. In a home where you got one healthy kid and one kid with a disability, man, the moms and the dads and everybody's always taking care of the kid with the disability, and the healthy kid, doesn't get a whole lot of attention. It's a tough situation. But if we can make this child with a disability a little bit more independent, that means that mom has a little more time to give to the other sibling or to herself, and that's just nothing can replace that. Let's go to the next slide, please. This one kind of speaks for itself. We see a lot of our clients. I think, in fact, cerebral palsy is the condition that we tend to treat the most. And you've seen these people all over the place. Their hands and their fingers start to curl up, and they just lose the strength and dexterity to be able to do things. This guy, he hated the fact that all his siblings could control the television and he couldn't. This was all about control for him. He hated watching their shows, and if he just had a remote that he could use, he could regain control of the family television set. And it worked. It worked out great. This is one of my favorites. This one we call the fishing magician. He has the same situation, same condition, cerebral palsy as the other person did. He loves to fish, but he simply can't control the rod. So what our engineers did is create, because even if you can't do this and this, what you can do is punch a button. We do a lot of this punch button technology. So he can get his hand around the rod, not with a lot of control, but well enough that he can be engaged and feel like he's participating in fishing. And then we have a little panel for him that has 3 buttons. One is cast, so he pushes the button and the machine takes him through the casting motion and just assists him. Second button is set the hook, and he kicks that and he just does a little twitch to set the hook. And the third button helps him reel in that fish. I love the Fishing Magician. You all familiar with Stepping Stones? Stepping Stones have been around forever, right? An incredible organization. We've got 2 Fishing Magicians at Stepping Stones. So now all those kids can use it and go fishing. That one everybody can relate to, right? I mean, as a parent, and your kid can't ride a bike, I mean, that's just heartbreaking. So when we create devices that allow children to ride bikes that normally couldn't, it always means the world to the families. Not all of our solutions have to have a ton of technical sophistication. A lot of them do, but some of them don't. We just finished a project for a young boy who he was born without fingers. So where our fingers start, his ends, he just has nubs right there. But his siblings were riding their bikes around, and it was driving him crazy because he couldn't. This was just a non-engineer volunteer took a pair of the Crocs that you wear, like clogs, mounted them to the handlebars, and they have that sort of tacky feel to them anyway. And now all he does is slide his hands or nubs, whatever you want to call them, into the Crocs. And now he zips around. And it works out great. And they did it, in about 5 minutes with about $5. He's a local teacher who we adapted a bike for. He loves to zip around in the hallways on his bike now. We do a lot of work with Cincinnati Children's Hospital. So in 2017 and 18, May Help did 348 projects for people. Okay? 64 of those projects were direct referrals from Cincinnati Children's Hospital. So sometimes the therapist will give us a project for one of their clients, but other times we create a device that everybody at Cincinnati Children's Hospital will use. For example, we just delivered 2 weeks ago a customized chair for therapists at Children's Hospital who do swallow studies. The chair that they were using, though, was ill-suited to accommodate children with disabilities. And so we gave them a brand new chair. And when the doctor looked at it, he goes, "We need to patent this." So it's really, we've just changed the way they do swallow studies at Children's Hospital now. It's great. This was for a direct referral from the therapist. And that little boy, what he needed for his therapy is to be able to move laterally. He needed to exercise laterally, but he wasn't into it. It's kind of boring. So the way all of our projects start is with a discovery visit. So what that means is we get a team of volunteers together, and they go to the client's home, and they get a better feel for the client and a better feel for the environment in which that client lives. So then when our volunteers did the discovery visit at his house, they learned that they saw a bunch of marble games. You know those marble games that you put the marble in and it goes in? He loved those. And so they said, what if we create a game where he has to put the marble in on this side and it'll come out on this side? So he's got to go over here and get the marble, and he's got to go back here and put it in. And it worked. This is another great example of really having an impact on Children's Hospital. So this part of the device, with the numbers on it, that thing's called a goniometer. It's not so important that you remember that. But what it does is it measures head rotation for kids who have something called torticollis. But they just keep a baseline of it, and they're measuring improvement in head rotation, right? The problem is it's always done on infants, and the infants won't sit still. So they were having to bring in a second therapist or a caregiver to hold the goniometer so that they could hold the child with one hand, the caregiver could hold the goniometer, and then they needed the other hand to write down the results and stuff. Well, it was taking 2 therapists or a ton of time to get a caregiver. Well, we created those 2 holders on either side, and now they can do it with one person. And when you run the math, we're saving Children's Hospital $19,000 a year, just with these goniometer holders. They worked so well, they ordered 50 of them. This is another device, project that we did. It was desperately needed by children with autism. It's called a sensory chair. It started with one client, one family's needs. They came to us and said, this guy, he experiences sensory overload, like most children with autism do. But what that means is we just become ultra sensitive to sensory input, and sometimes they've just had enough. They can't take anymore. So there's 3 qualities that they asked for in this chair. They said, 1, he loves to rock. He loves that rocking motion. 2, like a lot of children with autism, they love to feel cocooned. And then 3, like we were just talking about, they just have sensory overload, and they need to be able to get inside some sort of dark area, pull a screen over themselves, and just shut everything out. So we created a sensory chair. Well, now we've delivered 180 of them to hospitals, to homes, of course, to trauma-informed care units. It's just working everywhere. And we just had what we call a build day. So our volunteers cut out all the parts, and then we brought in 30 volunteers, and they helped us create about 50 sensory chairs that we're distributing now. And in some cases, we've talked about we've talked about all of them. So we delivered the SkyArm. It started with one client, but it worked so well. Now we gave a bunch to St. Joseph Home. That's the dressing hook that we created for Inga. That thing worked so well for Inga, we showed it to Cincinnati Children's. They asked for 8 of them. And now all their therapists are using the dressing hook. And of course, we talked about the fishing magician being in stepping stones. One of the things we've done in the last 6 months is really take a look. What we've mostly taught you about our core programming, which is helping individuals. But in the last 6 months, we really wanted to expand our impact on the community. And so we asked ourselves the question, what if there must be other organizations that we can create solutions for? Cincinnati Zoo, they have a train. Everybody seen their train? It's great. It's been there forever. It's a huge part of the zoo experience. Very ill-suited to accommodating people with disabilities. So they asked us to modify their train car to make it more inclusive and more accommodating to people with disabilities. So we've already done all the work. We've created about 6 different scenarios of solutions for them to consider, and we'll be meeting with them in mid-April. And they're going to choose one of the solutions, and I guess in about 6 months, their train car will be completely accommodating to people with disabilities. It's great. Hospice of Cincinnati. I went to them and said, I'll bet you we could help you. And they said, sure enough, they said, you know what we've got? We do a bunch of home care. We do home care for about 60 to 70 people a year. And they have to rent recliner chairs that have a lift mechanism, because while the folks can get into the recliner, they can't get out of the recliner. So they push a button and the recliner chair comes up and gets them out of the chair. Well, they rent those, and it costs hospice $45,000 a year. We're creating a solution for them that will keep them from having to rent and save them $45,000 a year that they can now put towards better things. St. Joseph Home. My favorite project we've delivered to St. Joseph Home. We've delivered, I think, about 25 projects to St. Joseph Home, and I'm telling you, when we walk in the door at St. Joseph Home, all the caregivers there are like this to us. I mean, they roll out the red carpet because we've made their residents' lives easier, and we've made the caregivers' lives easier. Here's my favorite example. That is Betsy there in her wheelchair. Let me explain what she's doing. The residents at St. Joseph Home love the simple pleasures of life. They love to rock in a rocking chair just like you and I do. The problem is getting them into the rocking chair. What caregivers really were doing is lifting them out of their beds, where they spend 23.99 hours of the day, lifting them out of their beds or chairs and then sort of dropping them as gracefully as possible into the rocking chair that they had. Well, there's not a whole lot of dignity in that. So our volunteers created a base that now residents at St. Joseph Home can wheel their chair onto whenever they want, and with the push of a button, the base rocks their wheelchair. And now all 48 residents at St. Joseph Home are rocking all day long. It's great. And of course, we talked about Cincinnati Children's already. Oh, this is a great one. So anybody familiar with the Miracle League, the Joe Nuxall Miracle League out in Fairfield? So if you haven't, it's coming up. Baseball season is upon us. So go out to Fairfield, check out the Joe Nuxall Miracle League. So what they've done is they've built 2 baseball fields. And they're like the regulation baseball fields for the most part. They're huge. They have the giant screens just like you'd get at a Reds game. There's popcorn and Cokes, and there's an announcer who announces every single person that comes to bat. They announce all the plays. It's just like going to a real game, except it's children with disabilities that are playing. And here's the coolest thing. The field has no grass or dirt on it. It's all rubber. So that people kids with walkers and kids who are in power chairs can run the bases, so to speak, and they can be in the outfield and zip around. Not only is the field all rubber, there's not even a single seam in the rubber. It's one sheet of rubber. So you don't have to worry about your cane or your walker or anything getting stuck in a seam. It's an amazing experience. But anyway, the problem that they had was not everybody could swing the bat. So we created for the Miracle League what we call the batter up. And that's what you see there. And with the push of a button, a person can swing the bat. And it's their ball that's soaring through the air when they run the bases. It's really neat. Anyway, the Miracle League has been so successful that they created, and are building it right now, an 18-hole miniature putt-putt course for the kids. But you end up with the same problem, right? So when you're in a wheelchair, how on earth do you putt the ball that's over there? So we're creating solutions to help kids with disabilities navigate that golf course. Another need that we've identified in the community is within our universities. Occupational therapy students, mechanical engineering students, industrial design students. Their professors all want them to have real life experience before they get into before they get out into the real world, right? Well, how do you get that? One way to get it is to come to May We Help and take on some of our projects. So we are bringing together, just like I said, mechanical engineering students, industrial design students, and occupational therapy students to solve our clients' problems. And it's actually an official part of the UC curriculum now. Like, you can't graduate from the occupational therapy program unless you've completed a project for us. So it's kind of neat. We're doing a similar thing with University of Dayton. So that's a win-win for sure. And this Sunday, this is our first one that we're doing. But it's an adaptive equipment swap. So let me put that in perspective for you. We talked about the discovery visits that our volunteers do. When we get a project, we form a team of volunteers. They visit the house where that client lives to get a better feel for his or her needs. And I'm telling you, I do as many of those visits as I can so I can come here and share with you their stories. Without exception, when we're in the basements and the garages of these families' homes, there are always 5 or 6 or 7 pieces of adaptive equipment that they're no longer using. Maybe the kids grew out of it. Maybe their conditions evolved beyond it. But the equipment's too expensive to throw away. I mean, in some cases, it's worth 30 grand. I mean, a power chair can be $30,000. What, are you going to throw it away? So it just sits there. But then there's so many families that we meet that need that equipment. So our idea is to bring all the equipment out of these people's garages and basements, bring it, it's 4 minutes down the road from where we are right here at our place at May We Help, and we've collected it all. You should see our place. There's not a square foot. You kind of we're like hoarders now. Yeah. We're just zipping through there's just so much adaptive equipment. And we're cleaning, all our volunteers have been there for days cleaning it all. And on Sunday, we've invited the community to come, and now you can just take home a piece of equipment that maybe you've been waiting for 4 or 5 years for at no charge. So every therapist that we've talked to in this community thinks it's going to transform families' lives. Yeah. We don't know anybody else that's offering this, even in the country. Some of the inspiration for it was I moved here from Colorado, and the ski town I lived in, every year they had a ski swap, right? Because your kids are growing, they grow out of the skis, or, you know, they gave up skiing and got into motorcycles, who knows? But you can't go buy ski equipment every year, it's too expensive, just like adaptive equipment. And the ski swap is always ultra successful, so we think on Sunday we are in for a real successful event. We talked about our process. Well, the one part we didn't talk about, though, is we've got this amazing $150,000 workshop at our space. You can do any kind of work there you need. You can do plastic works, you can do metal works, you can do wood works. We offer classes. I mean, it's an amazing workshop. Provided to us through the generosity of another really amazing organization called Impact 100. Anybody heard of Impact 100? They're fabulous. I love telling their story. I think it started about 11 years ago, but one woman, very pioneering, thought to herself, God, if I kicked in $1,000 and I got 99 of my friends to each kick in $1,000, we would have $100,000 to put towards some important evolution in our community. And now they're giving away 4 $100,000 grants every year. And in 2015, we helped one of those. And that gave us $100,000 to put towards our $150,000 workshop. Very self-explanatory. If you go to our homepage of our website, there's a little video at the top. But if the next thing you see when you scroll down the page are these 3 buttons. So if you're interested in volunteering, you click on the volunteer button. You want to request a device, click on that one. And if you want to donate, you click on that one. Very easy to navigate our site. And I just love that pic, and I just thought it'd be a great way to end it. It says it all. That particular walker that we created for that young man, though, allowed his family to do some missionary work in Africa together as a family. They didn't think they would be able to go with his existing equipment. And they said they need something that he can, you know, work over rugged terrain. And so we created that and allowed them to be in Africa for about 6 weeks. Anyway, I can't thank you enough for having me. I love talking about mainly health and thank you so much. And I can take any questions.
No questions?
I want to thank Ken for helping me get here tonight.
And I'm sorry for being late.
Please, no worries.
Well, thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much.
Thank you.
This was great.